Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to this Write Like episode.
As you know, in these episodes, we talk about famous and infamous writers whilst tackling prompts in their honour.
Style, structure, or tone, we intend to see what happens when we borrow from the greats.
Our writer today was an American who started out as a journalist, wrote short stories, then novels. Truly, his style of omission and implication is famous wherever writers write.
When interviewed on his boat after winning the Nobel Prize for Literature, he said, "The hardest thing is to make something really true, and sometimes truer than true." It could only be Ernest Hemingway.
This one's been coming for a while. I've been really enjoying the Right Likes. But
Yeah.
I think we had to build up to this one a bit because the idea of trying to write like someone who is such a huge figure,
Yeah.
like Ernest Hemingway. I know we've written, Dickens, for example, the last one that we just did, but Hemingway, there's something like complicated about his technical style. He has his own mythos as well around him about like his own personal bravery and his exploits.
Yeah.
It's sort of it's like half writing like a very famous author and half writing like an important person from history. And
Goddamn American hero.
yeah, exactly, yeah. I was pretty excited but trepidatious, I would say, coming into this one.
It's just on that line, isn't it? You know, we've got a huge list of authors that we pull
Mhm.
from, and then every so often we hit a name and we go, I don't really want to do Tolkien. I feel like I couldn't do it justice in this number of words, or whatever excuse we come up with to say I just don't want to do that one.
Mm,
And I think Hemingway is just on that line, isn't it? Of
I think so.
okay, no, yeah, okay, I can do that, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But maybe I was wrong.
Perhaps, yeah. I will say it was pretty hard. It the It's so difficult not like even the quote that we just said. The hardest thing is to make something really true and sometimes truer than true. That is like a gnat's hair from being utter bollocks. It like just sounding like nonsensical drivel, but it's just on that side of being.
Now,
Oh,
is
actually,
it just on that side because he was on a boat holding his Nobel Prize for Literature?
well, maybe, but then
Like, if
context is sort of king in that regard, isn't it? Like,
I guess so, because if I saw that, if an Instagram model, just some dude with beautiful cheekbones wearing a pair of Ray-Bans was like, the hardest thing is to make something really true and sometimes truer than true, I'd be like, what a wanker.
yeah, absolutely, and it is pretty wanky. But as you say, he is holding his Nobel Prize, so
Yeah, and I think actually, like, it's not just because he's got the prize and because he's on a boat, but he's earned the right to say the words as well, rather than just
yeah,
mattering what the words are. Like, that's quite a complicated thing, isn't it?
I think so. I actually didn't read The Old Man and the Sea for ages, that's the one that he wrote right before getting the prize, this big
Yes.
Nobel Prize. And I liked it a lot, but it's definitely not my favorite Hemingway novel. And it's sort of like when someone wins an Oscar, isn't it? You sort of like, did they really win it for that movie, or did they win it for?
For the one they did last year, but they had to give it to this other one, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like like Leonardo DiCaprio finally winning an Oscar. It was sort of like maybe that kind of vibe.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, The Old Man and the Sea is extremely good. Like I'm not knocking The Old Man and the Sea. It's a good
2 out
novel.
of 10. Shit.
Well, I guess it's more of a novella, really, isn't it? It's quite short, but yeah, it's 2 out of 10. Shit.
Old man
No.
and the shit, more like hey, hey.
So I'm fairly sure from our conversations earlier that I think I've experienced a bit more Hemingway than you have. Have you read it? I know you've read some of his short stories. Have you read any of the novels?
Not one.
Not one. Okay. Because I
It's
think.
it's one of those things where it's almost become like a guilt thing now, where
Oh, really?
because I've never read it and I don't really know where to start. But it's hard to say to maybe this can be my leaping off point because it's really hard to say to someone, "Hey, where do I start with Hemingway?" without them going, "You've never read any Hemingway." So it's
I always feel like, because I think people feel that way about movies that they haven't seen, or as you
Yes.
say, books they haven't read, or I don't know, plays they haven't watched, whatever it is. But I don't think that's got much place after a certain point in life. You know, there's if you're not having your finger on the pulse of like a youth movement when you're in your teens,
Yeah.
and you're a 30-something-year-old man who loves reading and stuff, you can just start wherever you want. Like you can do whatever you want, and if you haven't read something, that's fine. Do you know what I mean? Like it's okay to be at that stage. And in
Yeah.
fact, I would always say I'm continually jealous of people that get to experience stuff for the first time. So when you put Game of Thrones in front of someone, when you put a Tarantino movie in front of someone, and they've never seen it or read it before, that's exciting. That's an exciting
Yeah.
moment.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
so for me, I would say that my favorite Hemingway novel is For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is about the Spanish Civil War in the late 30s.
Okay.
And it draws heavily on his personal experiences of being a journalist in that area. And it's an absolute doorstop, but
Yeah.
it's really good, and it just weaves together this beautiful tale. Basically they're just there to do a bit of sabotage, like guerrilla warfare sabotage,
Yeah.
but it's very complicated and extremely worthwhile. Like it's very, I found it a very fulfilling book to get my teeth into.
Yeah.
But the first one that I read was The Sun Also Rises, which is all about like bullfighting and stuff in Spain,
Oh, cool.
and people having like taught interpersonal dramas in Spanish bars around the bullfighting and stuff, and people sleeping with each other's wives and all that kind of thing, and
That's
soldiers dealing with
great.
their injuries. Yeah, it's really fun. So that was the first one that I read, and it is a very good entry point. So I'd probably recommend The Sun Also Rises, because I think people would often bounce off The Bell Tolls.
Yeah.
Um, but if
It's
you've already know what to expect, then you can really build up a head of steam with it.
it's an interesting thing I'm seeing in a lot of the writers we're doing as well. A lot of American writers start as journalists.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Or
even a lot
seem
of
to.
English do as well. Yeah, I the it's sort of perpetual, this, isn't it? Like this idea that you get good at writing by continually writing, and who writes more than journalists?
True, yeah.
Uh, and I found that with this podcast. We've basically been continually writing short stories for going on 2 years now.
So why am I still shit, Ben?
Well, you're not. You're very good. I think.
It's all for the joke, don't worry.
Yeah. It's so the I think that's why. I think that it's
Yeah.
just quite simply because they get to hone their craft, and some people stay as journalists, which is fine, and other people find their passion elsewhere, which Hemingway definitely did. Um, but as you could tell, I could probably waffle on about Hemingway for a while, so
Well, buckle in, listeners.
I should probably move us along. So the man himself said that courage is grace under fire. So imagine I'm pointing a gun at you.
Oh,
The prompt is islands, and you're up first. Vamos, amigo.
islands. How long shall it be until we get there? Asked the child. It was a youthful question, one that with time would fade as patience took its place. I don't know, replied the man. I'm tired of travelling. Then looked from the window. There was almost nothing to be seen. No view save the eddies and twirls of unforgiving cloud. Everything behind them was blue, and everything around them was white. I can't see anything. This was fair and true, and the man couldn't help but agree. He squinted as though he may peer through if he were to look hard enough. Together, they stared at nothing. I'm very bored. Then you must amuse yourself. The child thought on this. They had never had to be amusing, for themselves nor anyone else. It had always fallen upon the adults to amuse them. Where were the circus clowns now? They would be useful. The child had seen clowns in a town square once, and not thought much of them at all then. But now they would be good. when compared to nothing. I did not know how to amuse myself, the child stated, airing the thought. And I do not know how to amuse you, said the man. I do not know you. That's true, said the child, and began to think about how they came to be sat beside the man. Do you know my parents? The man thought. I cannot say. I don't know you, so I don't know who your parents are. Perhaps I do know them. They were both quiet again, left with only the soft noises that we call silence. How did I come to be here? The child ventured. I don't remember, said the man, before considering what a queer thing that was to say. Nor do I, said the child. They travelled then for some time in silence, each drawing their own conclusions on where they may have been. Outside the glass, there were still only clouds, twisting and turning, that way and this. After some time, a woman came to offer them something to drink. Excuse me, miss, said the man. Where are we going? He thought the question might make him sound quite mad, but the woman smiled. To the island. To an island? But why? To the island, sir. She still wore that smile, like chains around a bear. The man began to think of every island he knew. The small ones that were filled with chattering monkeys, those were of no interest to him, though he rather thought his wife had wanted to visit Madagascar. He had a wife. A strange remembrance. It felt as though it belonged in someone else's luggage. He shook his head to clear it. Do you know of any islands? He asked the child. The child thought for some time. He stared at the clouds while he did. England, he said. Perhaps they were coming from there, the man thought. After all, he didn't remember being anywhere else. Any others? The child thought again. More clouds were watched. They looked like whipped cream. Someone should add strawberries. The man seized the child by their shoulders. How can you be thinking of such things? What are you doing? Amusing myself, said the child. They twisted to be free. They found again the silence of their trip. Both were afraid now, but of different things. The taps and whirs of the silence seemed to close in. I cannot do this any more, said the man, standing up. The child turned to watch him. I cannot sit here and wait for some mysterious island. Why ever not? Asked the child. He was stunned and sat once again. He turned to see the child, their fingers turning smudges on the glass into pictures. I'm sorry, he said. The child stopped. Me too. I'm scared. Me too. The man put his arm around the child. The child cried into a sleeve. Both watched the endless clouds and waited for the island to come to them.
That was very good. I liked that a lot. The that imagery of this this plane to the afterlife well, at least that's my interpretation of it. I felt very connected to in a way.
Yeah.
Using a child as a character is quite interesting as well. I haven't really seen or read much Hemingway where he has children as characters.
Yes.
So that was interesting because I know you've read Hills Like White Elephants.
Yes.
Which is a very famous short story by Hemingway, and the female character in that is quite infantilized, isn't she?
She is. She is. She reads almost like a child.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think she is supposed to be like a much younger woman that he's knocked up.
Yeah.
In that story, So it was interesting to see that kind of character behave like a Hemingway character.
Yeah.
The dialogue was clipped in exactly the way that he does it. I felt, and I really liked the way that you iceberged the fact that they were afraid of different things, because that was down to us as the reader to know what you meant.
Yes.
It would have been very reasonable of you to put another line in there.
Yeah,
About,
that was.
yeah, but you
I'd say
didn't do
that
it.
was a big part of this. Was
Yes.
you very kindly had sent me an article about the iceberg theory,
Yeah.
and it's so difficult to put into your writing
Yeah.
because
You want to pull the trigger, don't you? But you
yeah,
can't. Yeah.
you want to be like, but bam, and I'm actually really glad that you got the like this is the trip to the afterlife thing, because I was trying to have it be, maybe they're just flying somewhere quite far away and this guy got drunk and he's woken up and someone's kid sat next to him, or maybe they have died, or there are a few different reads on it, but I think that's where it was, and maybe it is slightly too lent towards the afterlife. Maybe with a few little tweaks
Well,
it could be.
you don't want to hide plot. I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
Um,
get you.
I think that you've done it correctly. Like that's the right amount to have done, because you iceberged people's emotions and their past lives and the way that they interact and the resulting emotions from those interactions very neatly
Yeah.
inside this story device, which is this plane flying to the afterlife, this island. And most of his work, as to the best of my knowledge, is extremely grounded. It's about fishermen and soldiers, and ex-soldiers who like bullfighting, things like that. So to play with a bit of surrealism, or like a bit of fantasy, not as in like swords and shields fantasy, but literal like fantasy
Yeah, the
of
fantastical. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, was really nicely done. I feel like you added something of your own creativeness to that, whilst keeping to a right like of Hemingway. Like that did the way that their conversations bounced back and forth felt very good. I liked that a lot. I thought it was good, short and sweet as well. How long was that?
Uh, that was 700 words.
Crikey. Okay, so 100 under.
It was it was longer, and I had to take things out because I was over explaining, like exactly this iceberg principle that we've been talking about.
Mm.
But I was saying, oh, and he looked at the clouds and they did this and there was this, but that isn't how it should look. It's not how it should read.
So just to be clear, this iceberg theory, for everyone listening, I'm sure everyone probably has an idea of what it is from the way we described it, but it's essentially that he believed that in this theory of omission, and he wrote very confidently knowing what was happening for him, but leaving out details in such a way that he would almost talk around something,
Yeah.
and the reader would have to figure out what that thing was, and it should always be fairly obvious what that thing is, I think, but not in a sort of blunt, obvious kind of way, but in like a, oh, that would make sense. Oh, of course that's happening.
It's an excellent way to make you engage with it as well.
Yeah,
It means
it's very interesting.
you can't ever stop focusing. You can't
No,
skim read
yeah,
because you have to think, "Well, hang on, what's that in reference to?"
yeah. Why would they say that? Oh oh no.
But yeah, as an idea in terms of writing, definitely hard to use the first time, but something I think I almost certainly will revisit, just not to write whole pieces in, but knowing that you can use a sentence or
Mm,
a statement from a character to reveal the tip of something
yeah,
and let the reader figure it out. That's, I mean, frankly, genius.
yeah. It's elegant and simple.
Yeah,
And I think it's quite easy to misuse. Like, I mean, I'm about to read my story out as well, and there are a few times where I'm like, am I overusing this? Is this not happening? Um, because things still have to happen.
yes,
You know what I mean? Like, you can't just y- there needs to be something happening. Hills Like White Elephants is also very short, and it's about one thing, that they're talking around one thing, and in that case,
Yeah.
it's a proposed idea for an abortion procedure, and that's fine. But if as soon as you start to get a bit longer, if nothing's happening, if it's just one conversation, I feel like you're doing a disservice to your readers if there isn't actually some plot, some action happening.
Yeah.
So, but it's about finding a balance for sure. But I like the idea that you were saying you're going to take this forwards, and occasionally a character will say something to allow a reader to experience the other 80% that's below the waterline for themselves.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I like that. I feel strongly like that was a very good entry. I think it's always a good story when you're still thinking about it quite a lot afterwards. Um, I really enjoyed the description of she wore her smile like chains around a bear.
Yeah.
That's got that's like an onion, that isn't it? It's
I had to have at least one of my little things in there.
yeah.
My strange comparisons, but it seemed really fitting in that moment because that hostess look, and this may be because I've been we've both recently been watching The Boys, and that kind of wearing a
Mhm.
smile and covering up so much power with it. It's that
True.
the idea of being capable of being vicious and being strong, but all of that just being hidden behind that fake smile, especially in so bizarre a situation as this story takes place in. Yeah,
This is a perfect example because that's
yeah.
your intention, but what I took from it was that it was a performance, like
Ah,
like a performing bear. Um, so, but that's what you're going for with this. Like it's people are allowed to color it in to mean roughly what they want it to mean, um, while still serving the plot that you're trying to tell, so that the story's cohesive and makes sense. Which did happen because I did get what the story was about, despite it never being explicitly said.
English teacher out of 10.
Mm,
Absolutely smashed
for sure.
it. Right, go on. No more putting it off.
Yeah, no, it's
Let's have you. I'm excited for yours.
yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to reading it out. So I'll take a swing. Islands. The three of them were sat looking out of the skiff and away from each other. The whine of the outboard motor which drove them across the gap between the islands gave Diego a break from the lack of conversation. The minor come down from the night before had left the space between his ears sore, and so he let his hand trail in the light blue of the churned up water. I don't suppose there's any beer in that cooler, is there? Shouted Andreas over the noise. 150 baht, replied the pilot from the back of the boat. That's steep! You'd still pay more back home, Diego interjected, but Andreas kept his eyes on the pilot, who shrugged. Fine. Andreas flipped open the cooler and pulled out a bottle, then opened it using the bar blade that hung from the cooler's handle on a short string. He put the money in the small jar left in the cooler for that purpose. As Andreas was about to go back to staring out at the islands, Diego leant in and pulled out another bottle. Would you like one too? He shouted towards Miriam, who sat in the prow with her back to everyone. Why not? We're all on holiday after all, aren't we? Her sharp tone cut through the noise. Diego passed the bottle to her and plucked a second one for himself. I'll get hers, Andreas said, and placed 150 in the jar. Diego fished for his own wallet, then paid for his before shutting the lid of the cooler. Andreas looked at the lines on Miriam's back, where her strapped tops had left the skin pale despite the continual sun. He remembered how absurd the smiley-faced pasty she'd been wearing the previous night had looked when she was angry. She wasn't angry now, just quiet. It was like watching a storm from the sea roll in. Andreas wondered if she'd be this way with him indefinitely, if that taste of something different would linger between them every time they kissed. It was likely over, he decided. Why wouldn't it be? If the trust goes, so does the love. Miriam watched the point where the water continually parted to let the teal bow of the skiff pass. There had been dozens of boats there last night, all moored in the cove and hung with lanterns. Most were taxi boats, but others held tall lamps that flooded the shore's edge with light. Thousands of half-naked people had claimed the shore. spilling up the beach towards the lights of the bars, a glittering panoply of shining flesh, beads, and UV paint. Many of them had been slurping from buckets of strong liquor, whilst others had found different ways to alter their consciousness. Miriam had felt something was wrong when they had left her to boisterously clamber the rocks which turned the edge of the cove. Their booze-fueled chest thumping had been wearing her down as the party had gone on, and she decided to watch some fire jugglers instead of joining them. She'd eventually followed them, though, worrying they'd slip and crack their skulls. It had been worse, she thought, that she'd found them very much alive. The teal skiff pulled into the small jetty by their hut, barely bumping the small tyres strung along it to cushion impacts. Miriam was the first out, her sandaled feet slapping at the jetty's slats as she marched away from them. Andreas hopped out after her and tried not to be seen to run in order to catch her up. Diego paid the pilot and got out as well, unwilling to follow them into another silent conversation. The pilot tore away from the jetty, gunning his pitiful engine back the way they'd come in search for more butt. The small beach by their rented two-storey hut looked smooth. The chairs they'd left out still pointed between the islands, at the deepest part of the ocean they could see. Diego took his rapidly warming beer and sat himself in one of them. The tiredness washed over him, and he focused on the way the sun glanced in scalding slivers from the truest blue water. He'd spent years hopping from one luscious country to another, and he was starting to feel like all that beauty had aged him. Voices raised up behind him from the beach hut like a sudden squall. Diego tucked his chin in and hunkered down in the chair when he heard a glass shatter and a door being slammed. The horrible silence returned after that. The beer was all but gone. There was plenty more in the fridge, but he'd be fucked if he was going in there. Instead, he let the bottle drop onto the sand by the chair and tried to put everything into perspective. As a four-letter man, he'd often had to do that back home. Geological, that was the way to do it. The string of islands themselves were karst, slowly dissolving limestone hulks. If they would be gone one day, what would it ever matter what had happened on one of their beaches? People couldn't think like that all the time, though, or they'd never motivate themselves to get anything done. Diego felt a sharp prod on his dangling hand and jumped up. A black scorpion shuttled back and forth in his shadow, stinger tail curled above itself, looking to strike again. The wound had already puffed up, and Diego kicked the beach chair over the creature. Cradling the injured hand, Diego walked up the beach, hurrying towards the hut whilst trying to keep his mind from capsizing into unseemly panic. It just needed a wash, he thought, a compress from the freezer, and maybe something from his hangover kit. All was quiet when he slipped inside, and Diego moved quickly into the kitchen. Miriam was sat on the floor by Andreas. Broken bits of a bottle stuck out of his scalp. Did he hit something on the way down? She said nothing. The edge of the counter? She said nothing. Couldn't you have just left him? Miriam said nothing.
Good grief.
Mm.
I really was taken on a journey by that.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I know this is because of the iceberg theory thing, but my brain kept taking those gaps and filling them in, and at first it felt like a forbidden gay romance. And then it had this weird, almost like Famous Five edge to it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like in the middle, it's talking about, they were clambering over the rocks, and she thought she'd best go and check on them. It got this kind of like grown up Famous Five out on an adventure thing, and it meant that when it dropped and it became dark, that was so weighty.
Oh, it's fascinating.
That it did a great job of making me go, oh no. And yeah, honestly, fantastic ending with her not responding and him just pushing a little bit more with each question and no resolution. Really, really nicely done. Thank
you. I had a lot of fun writing it. I think there are some bits that you can see where I've recently read Hills Like White Elephants, but also there is a fairly famous short story by him called it's called the Short Happy Life of Francis Macumber.
Okay.
About a man who goes on like a safari with his wife and basically exhibits some cowardice when he shoots a lion.
Yeah.
And it's all about the way that their relationship breaks down because of this display of cowardice, and you sort of learn more and more about the things that have gone wrong for them in the past, and ultimately there is a death as well, which heavily inspired the way that this story turned out.
There's a absolutely fantastic line in there when he sat out on the beach. He thinks, these islands will be gone one day. So what does it matter what happens here?
Mm.
And then it's followed shortly after by, but you couldn't think like that all the time, or it's not. People couldn't think like that all the time, and it was almost humbling. Just a
Yeah,
really nice moment, and it begins the kind of you've heard not long before that something smashed inside, but you don't really know. Was something thrown in an argument? Was etc.
yeah. I
And
mean, it obviously becomes clear at the end that she's hit him
she's
with a
hit.
bottle, and
Yeah,
and then he's hit something on the way down, which is what he's mistaken for a door slam, isn't it? Um, the thing that you may not have got from that paragraph where about the geological perspective of the dissolving limestone hulks and stuff
yeah,
is that during the opening of that paragraph he says, as a four-letter man, he'd often had to do that back home, as in put things into perspective in order to deal with them.
yeah.
And that is an insult taken directly from Hemingway as well, because a four-letter man, the implication is HOMO, so calling someone a homo.
Oh, so my queer read at the beginning was quite good then.
Your query was entirely accurate.
I mean,
So,
that's kudos both to you and to, I guess, my gaydar. But
yeah. So, as I was saying earlier, Hemingway believed that the writer had to know exactly what was going on and then write around it and let people fill in. So it can mean whatever people want it to mean. But for me, this story is about during a Thailand full moon party, a dude cheats on his girlfriend with a friend, and she catches them, and it gets out, and then the fallout gets out of hand.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
I this has brought some interesting stuff out of us, man. Maybe it's like, I mean, you'd said to me it was you really like Hemingway, you have a lot of respect for him, so it meant you had to bring your A game, but I think you really did.
oh, that's very kind. I think I'm pretty pleased with the story, but I think one of the things that's left me sort of like a feeling a bit like a drooling imbecile is that this man made it look easy to write like this, and it's
Oh
really
God, this
not.
was so hard.
It's so hard, and to even attempt it and make something that looks like a bit of a facsimile, even a pale facsimile, is still very hard.
Yeah,
So
hours and hours for 700 words,
yeah,
hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and
yeah,
I deleted way more than I kept
yeah, for
because I
sure.
was just looking at it and going, this is nothing. This isn't any. It doesn't provide anything. It doesn't fit the style. It just and that happens so rarely that I didn't really know what to do,
It
and
feels like it's the next level up, doesn't it?
yeah,
Because
it's so hard.
because if you've got your ability to plot a short story down, to characterize people, to describe things, to have a rhythm, all these things that you need to have in order to have a successful short story. Then on top of it, you then start omitting things. It's
Yeah,
like the
now
next
do
level
that,
up.
but not that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you just got to imply everything. So although you've written 700 words, you've implied 7,000.
It was the hardest bit, honestly, was ending it. It's why I was so
Yeah,
impressed by
in
your
fact,
ending because it really does it without being, and that was the end, and everyone went home. You do end that arc within the greater story,
yeah,
and when I was writing, I was like, I I don't know when this stops, and I barely know when this started because it's like if you spent the rest of your time being a baker and making cakes, and then one day someone comes in and they're like, I'd like you to bake me one slice of cake, please, but I want it to taste like a whole cake.
yeah, Yeah.
What? That doesn't make any sense. Do
That's a
it.
that's
Do
a
it,
that's a
coward.
really fun but very accurate analogy. I like that a lot.
Terrifying.
And I think the other thing that I would mention is that I always my from the very first time that I read any Hemingway to still the present day, the thing that I love about it is that feeling like you've just been punched.
Yeah.
Like when you realize something, when the other shoe drops, it is like thump to the belly. Oh no. Then there's another one. In the novels
Yeah.
it just keeps going. But in the short stories it's normally just one big thump or maybe a couple, depending on how long the short story is.
I
Uh,
think honestly, if anyone, I know some people do write along and you do have a go with us. I really feel like Hemingway and this iceberg style of writing is just a good exercise to practice.
if anything, the exercise there, I totally agree. The exercise is just to write dialogue. So to imply action through dialogue and not just action but also like emotional consequence and other things like that. If you can, because Hills Like White Elephants is predominantly dialogue,
Yes.
untagged speech dialogue. So that's the real test, I think. If you can write, a story that's predominantly dialogue, which I haven't really done here. I think it's not quite half and half dialogue. There's still a lot of prose description and stuff happening, and you want some of that, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but if people are going on really focus on that bit, because I feel like that's the in on getting the iceberg theory down. Not saying we've got it down entirely, but like I felt stronger when it was people talking than I did when it was description.
Yes. I think the writerly instinct can be turned off slightly more when you're writing dialogue because you're writing in a voice.
Hmm.
But when you're writing description, you're writing in your voice. You, the
Yeah,
writer, you, the narrator.
that was the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of having, because obviously we're an audio podcast, so it's
Yeah.
you've got to read it out, which means that there is a point at which, because you're implying everything with trying to write like Hemingway with this iceberg stuff happening,
Yeah.
actually you kind of want readers' eyes on it directly, so that
Yeah.
you can't put any source on it at all. You can't spin speech that way or this way.
Yeah.
They've got to just read it. And in a way, I know it's a bit counterintuitive because we're still performing. We've performed two stories for you. In a way, I feel like Hemingway style doesn't do well when read out. It needs to be read, perhaps, to get like the full impact, because you need to be in your own mind really heavily to fully get it.
I 100% agree.
Mm-hmm.
100%. It's yeah, it's one of the few that, when I write for the podcast, I don't do a lot of formatting, really. I just get it all down and into a position where I can read it. But this one I had to format it to make it make sense before I could go back to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's all part of that. It's more than just the words, and it's unbelievably complicated. There's so much potential depth to it that it's well,
It-
like I said at the beginning, I've read almost no Hemingway, but I'm going to find out for whom the bell tolls.
yeah, possibly. Yeah, maybe you should go straight to that one. Um, if only because I think it's my favorite, and you've already got a grasp on how it works, so why not?
Well, you're my favourite, Ben. So I think I've got a new. We might have a name for this section after the
Oh, well,
after
the
the Dickens episode. I'm going to call this section the Verging on Apocryphal because I found a list of interesting facts about Ernest Hemingway,
Go on,
and
hit me.
I'd tell you what. So his mother Grace was the domineering type. That's not the fact, but an interesting way to open one. She wanted a daughter, not a son. To placate herself, after Ernest was born, she would dress him up in pink flowery dresses and call him Ernestine. How would anyone know that?
That sounds like he fancifully, unless you told him, like, oh god, that's fucked up. Not sure about that. It was still, I mean, he must have been born in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
When was he born? Was it like 1890 something?
Let me find out.
Yeah, 1899. There you go. So,
Okay.
um, I mean, it was the case that people used to put like, smocks on little boys and little girls, irregardless of their
Yeah.
sex. So I don't think that bit's too far fetched, but the idea of it being a deliberately like feminized smock, and also to change his name, like refer to him as the wrong name,
Yeah.
is that feels just like fairly deviant, doesn't it? That's pretty unpleasant.
Especially compared to all the other facts about how fucking manly this dude was. He started hunting early. At the age of 3, he killed a porcupine at his father's behest. He finished the job by eating it. He finished the job by eating it implies that this thing was like in the death
Yeah,
throes and he
yeah, yeah,
tucked in.
yeah. Which I don't think is right. Like he would have, because I think he was into like bushcraft and stuff. So I think that must have he must. I think they've just phrased that incorrectly. I think he probably killed it with something and then they ate it.
but but
But
Ben,
three is a bit young for that. I think.
well, that's nothing when you compare it to the fact that just after finishing For Whom the Bell Tolls, he went out with his third wife and 2 kids and killed 400 jackrabbits in one day.
400.
400!
What was he using? A fucking machine gun?
A small thermonuclear
Yeah,
device.
just like tucked a bloody dynamite into a warren.
These claims are fantastic.
400. That's nonsense, man. Like, you'd need an attack helicopter.
Oh, you're not wrong.
But then also, because I have heard that he was quite a boastful man.
Yeah.
He was very concerned with his own image. But then I think also that he did have a bit of a wild life. He traveled to war zones a lot. I think the FBI were investigating him at one point because he was kind of obsessed with Cuba. Um, and then there's this story from World War II that I remember where he he was there to like observe as a journalist, but he set up a like a paramilitary group with a bunch of locals
Right.
and like did some fighting. Like he led them like a commander, and he got into like some fairly serious like hot water because civilians are not allowed to do that. But I think he was like brought up on formal charges and stuff. Like he was properly reprimanded for it. But
Yeah.
there's a quote about it that goes, Hemingway got into considerable trouble playing infantry captain to a group of resistance people that he gathered because a correspondent is not supposed to lead troops, even if he does it well.
Such a sneaky flex in that statement.
But that's not him. That's somebody else talking about him.
I know, but
Yeah,
regardless,
yeah,
even if he does it well,
yeah.
I found a fun thing, which is that he ended up being quite good friends with Orson Welles,
Oh,
right?
really?
So apparently there was a documentary called The Spanish Earth, for which Hemingway had written some text, and a very young Orson Welles was recording voiceover for it because he had a great voice,
Mm.
but apparently in quite a snide and sarcastic way, and they came to blows. Right, so Orson Welles and Ernest Hemingway had a punch up, and then at the end decided it had been good sport and just became mates,
I fucking love that.
which
That's
is that's everything I want from life.
it's that I feel like that kind of like boisterous, larger than life character that was in for a good show
Yeah,
is exactly who he was trying to be, and
yeah,
I think it's very well known that he had fairly serious like especially in later life like depression and he was treated multiple times for for not being well and mentally.
mm,
Um, and obviously he ultimately shot himself in the head with a shotgun. So
yeah,
that's got an edge to it, hasn't it? But I think there was a person that he was trying to be, and that person was like a happy, boisterous, extremely talented, respected, almost, as I said at the start of this, mythological
Kind of
status
like a Teddy
person.
Roosevelt character.
Yeah, like that Rough Riding kind of
Yeah,
look and feel was certainly a big thing for him. And I would say that he was successful like that. I think that is, aside from his like obviously fantastic writing novels and short stories, that is his legacy to a certain degree. Is this
yeah,
image of Ernest Hemingway as this, relatively hard drinking wild man who was a good sport
yeah.
and was incredibly talented and lived through blah 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 blah. Like it just the list goes on and on. And I mean, it's. I remember when I first got into Hemingway, and then I found out how he killed himself, and I was actually really disappointed. And I don't know whether this is an okay reaction or to express, but like
Yeah.
I felt very disappointed that someone that I looked up to that much had essentially shot themselves in essentially in front of their family.
Yeah.
I don't think they were actually in the room, but like I can only imagine shooting yourself with a shotgun is messy as fuck.
It's not quiet or clean, no.
Yeah, you're not that he's not taking like a graceful way out because he's got a long illness or anything like that. He has you know fairly serious mental issues and he shoots himself extremely messily and loudly. I think his wife had to be sedated. She was
Wow.
it just bonkers, and I felt disappointed in the man because I I'm talking like 16 when I first, maybe even 15 when I first read a bit of Hemingway. So I was already being like looking up to this like manly man figure who
Yeah.
was essentially one of the masters of something that I was even then very interested in, i.e. writing.
Yeah.
And to find out that he died like that, I actually didn't read any Hemingway for several years after that because I was so disappointed in him as a person.
It's
Yeah.
his father took his own life. Two of his siblings took their own life,
Mm.
and his granddaughter did as well. So there's something in terms of mental health that they
Yeah,
clearly,
felt very strongly at the time that it was extremely selfish.
yes,
So, but I'm also aware that perhaps that isn't an okay view to hold or whatever, and I don't think it's. I'm not applying that generally as a, like a broad brush, like. But yeah, it definitely impacted my appreciation of Hemingway for a while, until I got it back into it by reading The Old Man and the Sea, which is the one that he actually, as I said earlier, theoretically won the Nobel Prize for.
yeah,
And then followed up with Filling the Bell Tolls, which I thought was superior. Yeah, what a wild ride! What a a great man. I'm sure he did, as we say, as a caveat for virtually every old white man that we've done these right likes on. I'm sure he was an absolute bastard to somebody at some point.
God, yeah.
I'm sure there's something that we haven't covered that was extremely problematic in his behaviour or outlook.
I mean
But
that person Ben was sharks, who apparently he would fire his machine gun at when he was fishing, just to make them stay away from his catch. So
yeah, well, fuck sharks. You've heard it here first.
dolphins too, all of them. Fuck them.
What, proper fuck 'em?
Well, really the deep.
Guy Ritchie, apparently. Oh well, that was a weird comment. Yeah,
Ah, we have a good time doing these, don't we?
I think so. I think so. Also, did you know that apparently I think he took I think his dick didn't work for a while as well because he got wounded in World War I, which is where a lot of his some of his like interpersonal drama comes from in his books.
Right.
Um, It's unfortunate, but
When you say didn't work, to what extent? Like, couldn't get hard, or he couldn't piss, or
I assume it was. I think it was a sexual problem. Yeah. So.
right? I was gonna just didn't work. It'd go for a wee, it would sprout out his finger. It was
Yeah,
oh,
I
crikey!
think he got hit like by a mortar or something. Like it was really like bad.
I need like the shell hit him in the dick, or one exploded near him and caused some penile problemos.
I think it was shrapnel from a nearby
because
explosion.
that is an impact, isn't it?
What, to be hit by a mortar round?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just say he wouldn't have written any fucking books after that.
Don't worry, guys. It was a dud.
It was a dud. It bounced off his massive penis.
Ah, I see. This story was also written by Hemingway.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?